The cruelest punishment in life is realizing you were loved only after you lost everything. The last apartment I lived in barely deserved to be called a home. The ceiling leaked whenever it rained. The heater worked only when it felt generous. The refrigerator made strange noises all night long. Yet none of those things hurt as much as the silence. I sat alone at a small kitchen table staring at unpaid bills scattered beneath a flickering light bulb. Outside, winter wind rattled the old windows. Inside, regret sat beside me like an unwanted guest. 10 years earlier, I thought I had won. I chose the handsome man everyone admired. The charming man who knew exactly what people wanted to hear. My stepsister Vanessa chose differently. At least that was what everyone believed. The truth was far uglier. Vanessa had always wanted whatever belonged to me. My clothes. My friends. My opportunities. Eventually, she wanted my fiancé too. Back then, I treated it like a competition. I fought for attention instead of paying attention. I chased appearances instead of character. And I ignored the one person who had quietly treated me with respect from the beginning. His name was Benjamin Hayes. At the time, nobody considered him impressive. He was serious, reserved, focused on building a business nobody believed would succeed. People called him boring. They called him cold. Some even called him a failure. I listened to all of them. That was my mistake. Now 10 years later, every television screen in America seemed to carry his name. Benjamin Hayes had become one of the most respected business leaders in the country. Meanwhile, my own life had fallen apart piece by piece. Jason's promises disappeared the moment they became inconvenient. His affection always depended on what he could gain. I saw that clearly now. Unfortunately, wisdom often arrives after the damage is done. Earlier that afternoon, I accidentally saw an interview featuring Benjamin. He stood in front of a new educational foundation building, speaking about opportunity and responsibility. The reporter asked what motivated his success. He smiled slightly and said, "The right choices rarely look glamorous in the beginning." Those words followed me all evening. The right choices. I closed my eyes and imagined the life I could have had. Not because of money, because of peace, because of trust, because every memory involving Benjamin contained kindness, while every memory involving Jason contained conditions. A sudden knock interrupted my thoughts. Minutes later, Vanessa stood inside my apartment. Even after all these years, she carried the same confident smile, the same satisfaction. She glanced around the room and barely hid her judgment. "Still here?" she asked. I laughed softly, not because it was funny, because arguing no longer seemed worth the energy. Vanessa adjusted her expensive coat. "You always did make strange decisions." Her words should have hurt. Instead, they felt distant, like echoes from another life. After she left, the apartment became quiet again. I sat by the window watching snow drift beneath the streetlights. My body felt exhausted. My heart felt heavier. For the first time, I admitted a truth I had spent years avoiding. I had not lost because Vanessa stole something from me. I lost because I failed to recognize what truly mattered. Tears blurred my vision as I looked toward the calendar hanging beside the refrigerator. 10 years. 10 years wasted. If I could relive one day, just one, I would choose differently. I would walk away from the lies. I would choose the man everyone underestimated. I would choose the future I was too blind to see. My eyes slowly closed. Then suddenly a bright light flooded the darkness. And when I opened them again, the calendar on the wall no longer showed today's date. When I opened my eyes again, the world felt wrong in a different way. The cold kitchen was gone. The flickering light was gone. The unpaid bills scattered across the table were gone. Instead, I was standing in front of a large mirror inside a bright dressing room. Soft morning sunlight filtered through tall windows covered in white curtains. My breath caught as I stared at my reflection. I looked younger, healthier. The exhaustion that had lived on my face for years was gone, replaced by a version of myself I had almost forgotten. My heart began to race. I turned quickly, scanning the room. Elegant dresses hung neatly on racks. Jewelry boxes sat open on a vanity table. A calendar on the wall caught my attention immediately. I stepped closer. My hands shook slightly as I reached for it. The date confirmed what my mind refused to accept at first. I had not simply dreamed. I had gone back. 10 years. Back to the morning of the engagement arrangement I had once destroyed my own life over. A sharp knock came at the door. Before I could respond, it opened. Vanessa walked in. She looked exactly as I remembered. Confident. Perfectly dressed. Smiling in a way that always carried hidden judgment. "You are still not ready?" she asked lightly. The sound of her voice made something inside me tighten. I had forgotten how easily she spoke to me as if I were beneath her. I forced myself to stay calm. This time, I studied her carefully instead of reacting. Every expression, every movement, every word she spoke carried a different weight now that I knew what she would become. "Father is waiting downstairs," she continued. "Jason will arrive soon. Try not to embarrass us." Jason. The name alone sent a cold wave through my chest. In my previous life, I had believed he was my future. I had believed his charm was love. I had been wrong about everything. Vanessa turned slightly, adjusting her earrings. "You are lucky, you know," she added casually. "Not everyone gets such a good match arranged for them." A bitter smile almost escaped me. Lucky. That word felt like a cruel joke now. After she left, I stood alone in the room for a long time. My thoughts raced faster than my heartbeat. I remembered everything clearly now. The engagement dinner. The way Jason smiled at everyone except me. The way Vanessa slowly inserted herself into every conversation, until he started paying more attention to her than to me. And most importantly, I remembered Benjamin Hayes. The man I had ignored. The man I had dismissed because others told me he was not important enough. My hands slowly clenched into fists. This time would be different. I walked to the mirror again. This time I did not see confusion. I saw opportunity. I saw a second chance that no one else knew I had been given. The door opened again, but this time I did not flinch. A maid announced that it was time to go downstairs. I nodded calmly and adjusted my posture. As I stepped out into the hallway, I made a silent promise to myself. I would not repeat the same mistakes. I would not chase illusions. And I would not let Vanessa take anything from me again. Because this time, I already knew exactly where every choice would lead. And this time, I would choose differently. The engagement dinner began exactly as I remembered. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the ballroom with warm golden light. Conversations drifted across the room. Servers moved quietly between tables carrying trays of sparkling drinks and carefully arranged appetizers. 10 years ago, I entered this room filled with excitement. This time, I entered carrying knowledge. That changed everything. I immediately spotted Jason standing near the center of the crowd. His smile looked identical to the one I remembered. Charming. Confident. Effortless. Most people saw charisma. Now I saw calculation. Across the room, Vanessa stood beside him laughing at something he said. The sight would have shattered me in my previous life. Tonight, it only confirmed what I already knew. As guests gathered, my father approached with obvious satisfaction. "Olivia," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Tonight is important. Make a good impression." I smiled politely. Of course. He had no idea how different this evening would become. During dinner, events unfolded almost exactly as they had before. Jason directed most of his attention toward Vanessa, whenever he thought nobody was watching. Vanessa responded with practiced admiration. They believed they were subtle. They were not. The difference was that this time I was no longer competing for his attention. I observed quietly instead. At one point, Jason finally turned toward me. "You seem unusually quiet tonight." His tone sounded concerned. The performance was impressive. "I am simply listening," I replied. Something flickered across his expression. Confusion. In the past, I would have eagerly sought his approval. My indifference unsettled him. Good. A few minutes later, my father raised a glass and addressed the room. Conversation stopped immediately. "Tonight," he announced proudly, "we celebrate an important step toward Olivia's future." Applause followed. I remembered this moment perfectly. In my previous life, I smiled and accepted congratulations while convincing myself everything felt right. Tonight, the same words sounded completely different. As the applause faded, I stood slowly from my chair. The movement drew every eye in the room. My father looked surprised. Jason looked curious. Vanessa looked cautious. I lifted my glass and smiled politely. Before everyone celebrates, I said, there is something I would like to clarify. Silence settled across the ballroom. My pulse remained steady. For the first time in years, I felt completely certain. Jason's confident expression began to crack slightly. He sensed something changing. He simply did not know what. I glanced toward him, then toward Vanessa. Finally, I addressed the room. I have spent a great deal of time thinking about the future. My father shifted uncomfortably. Olivia. I continued before he could interrupt. And I have realized that choosing the right person matters far more than choosing the most popular one. The room became even quieter. Vanessa's smile vanished entirely. Jason stared at me with growing confusion. Good. Let them wonder. Let them question. For years, I had followed expectations instead of instincts. Tonight, that ended. I lowered my glass and looked directly at Jason. I believe some people belong together, I said calmly. Then my gaze shifted toward Vanessa. And I think it is important to let them find each other. A murmur spread through the guests. My father looked completely bewildered. Jason opened his mouth as if preparing to respond. But I was already finished. Because somewhere beyond this ballroom existed a future no one else could see. And for the first time, I was finally walking toward it. The moment I left the ballroom, the whispers followed me like distant music. Guests exchanged confused glances. My father called my name twice before I finally stopped near the grand staircase. His expression carried equal parts frustration and disbelief. What exactly was that supposed to mean? He demanded quietly. I looked at him and realized something important. 10 years ago, I would have been terrified of disappointing him. Now I understood that disappointing others was sometimes necessary to stop disappointing yourself. It means I am making my own decision, I said calmly. He stared at me as though I had started speaking another language. Before he could continue, Vanessa appeared beside him. Her perfect smile looked strained for the first time all evening. Olivia, she said sweetly, everyone is worried about you. I almost laughed. Concern had never been Vanessa's strongest quality. There is no reason to worry, I replied. I have never been more certain. Her eyes narrowed slightly, just enough for me to notice. She could sense control slipping away, and that bothered her more than she would ever admit. The next morning, the house felt unusually tense. Staff members moved quietly through the halls. My father barely spoke during breakfast. Vanessa remained focused on her phone, though I noticed how often she checked for messages. Most likely from Jason. In my previous life, I would have been doing exactly the same thing. The realization made me strangely grateful. After breakfast, I left the house alone. The city looked exactly as I remembered from 10 years earlier. Busy sidewalks, street vendors, morning traffic stretching for blocks. Yet everything felt different because I was different. This time, I was not chasing someone. I was searching for someone. Benjamin Hayes. According to my memories, his company occupied a modest office building downtown during this period. Far from the powerful corporation it would eventually become. When I arrived, the building looked almost disappointingly ordinary. No luxurientrens. No impressiblovi. No crowds of reporters. Just a quiet office occupied by people who believed in something that had not succeeded yet. I stepped inside and approached the reception desk. May I help you? The receptionist asked politely. My pulse quickened. I would like to meet Benjamin Hayes. She looked surprised. Do you have an appointment? I hesitated briefly. 10 years ago, I never would have come here. 10 years ago, I barely noticed he existed. No, I admitted. But I hope he will make an exception. Several minutes later, I was escorted down a hallway lined with simple glass offices. Nothing about the space suggested future wealth. Everything about it suggested determination. Finally, the assistant stopped beside a closed door. Mr. Hayes can spare 10 minutes, she said. My heart began pounding harder. This was the moment that had never happened in my first life. The assistant opened the door. Benjamin stood near a large window overlooking the city. He wore a simple dark suit. No expensive watch. No signs of future success. Yet somehow he carried the same quiet confidence I remembered from years later. He turned toward me slowly. For a brief moment, surprise crossed his face. Then it disappeared. "Miss Carter," he said politely. "This is unexpected." I stepped inside and the door closed behind me. Sunlight spilled across the room. My future stood only a few feet away. Benjamin gestured toward a chair. "Please," he said, "tell me why you came." And for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I sat down across from the man I should have chosen from the beginning. Benjamin studied me for several seconds after I sat down. The silence did not feel uncomfortable. It felt deliberate. He was the kind of man who listened before speaking, observed before judging. Even 10 years before his success, that quality was already there. In my previous life, I mistook quiet confidence for a lack of ambition. Looking at him now, I could not understand how I had been so blind. "You wanted to see me," he said calmly. "I assume there is a reason." I smiled slightly. "There is." He leaned back in his chair, but never took his eyes off me. Outside the office window, the city continued moving at its usual pace. Cars filled the streets below. People hurried along sidewalks. Yet inside that room, it felt as though time had slowed. "Then I am listening," he said. My heart pounded harder than I expected. Explaining the truth was impossible. No one would believe I had already lived through the next 10 years. I needed another approach. "I think people often underestimate you," I said. A faint expression crossed his face. Not surprise. More like curiosity. "That is an unusual opening." I laughed softly. "Probably." Benjamin folded his hands together. "And what brought you to that conclusion?" "Because I watched an entire country eventually admire you. Because I spent 10 years regretting a choice involving you. Because I know exactly what kind of man you become." None of those answers could be spoken aloud. "Because I think character matters more than appearances," I replied instead. For the first time, a small smile appeared. It transformed his entire face. Not dramatic. Just genuine. "That is not a popular opinion." Maybe it should be. The conversation continued longer than either of us expected. 10 minutes became 30. 30 became nearly an hour. We spoke about business, community programs, education, family. The more he talked, the more memories from my previous life resurfaced. Headlines praising his leadership, interviews describing his integrity, employees speaking about his fairness. Everything matched the man sitting across from me now. Eventually, Benjamin glanced at the clock. I should probably return to work. There was amusement in his voice. "I have already ignored half my schedule." "Then I should let you escape." He stood. I stood as well. For a brief moment, neither of us moved toward the door. An unexpected thought entered my mind. This was the exact moment my future changed. Not through some dramatic declaration. Not through destiny announcing itself. Through a simple conversation. Through one choice. Benjamin finally broke the silence. "May I ask something?" "Of course." He hesitated briefly. "Why did you really come here today?" The question caught me off guard. Not because I lacked an answer. Because I had too many. I looked directly at him. Because I wanted to meet someone before everyone else realized his worth. Something shifted in his expression. Something thoughtful. He opened the office door and escorted me toward the lobby. When we reached the entrance, sunlight filled the glass atrium. People moved around us carrying folders and coffee cups. Ordinary moments. Ordinary surroundings. Yet my heart felt strangely lighter than it had in years. "Miss Carter," Benjamin said. "I hope this will not be our last conversation." I smiled. I was hoping the same thing. As I stepped outside, my phone immediately began vibrating. Vanessa's name appeared on the screen. I already knew why she was calling. Jason had spent the entire morning looking for me. In my previous life, that would have thrilled me. This time, I declined the call without hesitation. Then I looked back through the office windows. Benjamin had already returned to work. Focused. Determined. unaware that he was standing at the beginning of an extraordinary future, a future I intended to share this time. And for the first time since opening my eyes in the past, I truly believed I could change everything. Over the next several weeks, the differences between my two lives became impossible to ignore. In my previous life, every day seemed driven by anxiety. I constantly wondered whether Jason was telling the truth, whether he was keeping promises, whether I was enough. This time, something felt different. Peace replaced uncertainty. Not because my future was guaranteed, but because I was finally paying attention to the right things. Benjamin never made grand speeches. He never tried to impress me. Instead, he showed up exactly when he said he would. If we planned lunch, he arrived 5 minutes early. If he promised to call, the phone rang at the exact time he mentioned. Such small details seemed insignificant until I compared them to the life I remembered. Consistency was not exciting. It was far more valuable. One afternoon, Benjamin invited me to visit a community center his company had recently sponsored. The building itself was modest. Fresh paint covered the walls. New computers filled a small classroom. Children laughed as volunteers helped them with homework. Nothing about the project generated headlines. Nothing about it attracted attention from reporters. That was exactly why it mattered. As we walked through the center, I watched him stop to speak with nearly everyone he passed. He knew names. He remembered stories. He listened carefully. The children clearly trusted him. The staff respected him. There was no performance. No audience. Only genuine interest. Standing there, I remembered something from my previous life. Years later, journalists would praise Benjamin for his leadership. They would write about his success and wealth. Yet none of those articles ever fully captured what made him extraordinary. It was not his business. It was his character. Meanwhile, events were unfolding exactly as I expected elsewhere. Vanessa and Jason were spending more time together. Neither bothered hiding it particularly well. At a family dinner, I watched them exchange private smiles across the table. 10 years ago, that sight would have broken my heart. Now it simply confirmed what I already knew. After dinner, Vanessa approached me with obvious curiosity. "You seem unusually happy lately," she said. I smiled. "Maybe I am." Her expression tightened slightly. "That is surprising." I knew what she really meant. She expected me to be jealous, confused, desperate for Jason's attention. Instead, I seemed completely unaffected. The situation unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. A few days later, Jason finally confronted me directly. We crossed paths outside a charity event. "I do not understand you anymore," he said. I almost laughed. The truth was simple. For the first time, I understood him. "People change," I replied calmly. He studied me for several seconds. "You are making a mistake." The word sounded strangely familiar. In my previous life, I spent years convincing myself that leaving Benjamin behind had been the correct choice. Looking back, the real mistake had been trusting appearances over actions. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe I finally stopped making one." His expression darkened with frustration. Mine did not. Because deep down, I already knew where our paths would lead. Later that evening, Benjamin and I sat together on a quiet rooftop terrace overlooking the city skyline. Lights stretched across the horizon like scattered stars. The air felt cool and peaceful. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Benjamin glanced toward me. "You seem lighter lately." I smiled softly. Maybe I finally stopped carrying things that never belonged to me. He looked thoughtful. "That sounds like wisdom." I laughed quietly. If only he knew. As the city lights shimmered below us, I realized something important. This second chance was never only about avoiding mistakes. It was about recognizing value before it disappeared. And every day I spent with Benjamin made that truth impossible to ignore. Several months passed, and with each day the future I remembered drifted farther away. Some changes were small. Others were impossible to ignore. Benjamin's company continued growing steadily. New clients arrived. New partnerships formed. Yet success never changed him. That was what impressed me most. In my previous life, I only knew the public version of Benjamin. The headlines. The interviews. The achievements. Now I was seeing the years before all of that. The foundation beneath the success. One rainy afternoon, I arrived at his office carrying coffee for both of us. The receptionist smiled the moment she saw me. By then everyone in the building knew who I was. Not because of wealth or status. Because I visited often. Because I genuinely wanted to be there. As I stepped toward Benjamin's office, I noticed the door was slightly open. Voices drifted into the hallway. I recognized one immediately. Benjamin. The other belonged to an older man I had never met. I paused unintentionally when I heard the conversation. You should have accepted the offer years ago, the older man said. It would have made everything easier. Benjamin laughed softly. Easier is not always better. You sacrificed a great deal. For several seconds there was silence. Then Benjamin answered quietly. Some things are worth sacrificing for. The conversation ended shortly afterward. I stepped away before either of them noticed I had overheard anything. A few minutes later, I entered the office normally. Benjamin smiled when he saw me. You brought coffee. I brought coffee, I confirmed. He accepted the cup gratefully. Yet the earlier conversation remained in my thoughts. Later that afternoon, after the older visitor left, curiosity finally won. Who was that? I asked. Benjamin glanced toward the closed door. An old business partner. The conversation sounded serious. His smile faded slightly. Not from discomfort. From reflection. It was about decisions. My heart tightened unexpectedly. Decisions. That word seemed to follow both of us. I sat across from him. The decisions you regret? He looked genuinely surprised. Actually, the ones I do not. That answer caught me off guard. Benjamin set his coffee aside and leaned back. Sunlight filtered through the office windows as clouds slowly cleared outside. Years ago, he said, I had an opportunity to sell my company. I immediately remembered. In my previous life, business magazines often mentioned that story. You refused. He nodded. Everyone thought I was making a mistake. I smiled faintly. And were you? Benjamin looked toward the city skyline. No. His answer came without hesitation. Because the offer required me to abandon the mission that started everything. Something about those words stayed with me. Mission. Most people focused on outcomes. Benjamin focused on purpose. That difference explained almost everything. For a long moment neither of us spoke. Then he said something unexpected. Can I ask you a question? Of course. His expression became thoughtful. Why did you trust me so quickly? My pulse immediately quickened. The question had finally arrived. Months of friendship. Months of conversations. Months of shared experiences. And now the one question I could never fully answer. I lowered my eyes briefly before meeting his gaze. Because sometimes people reveal who they are long before the world notices. Benjamin studied me carefully. Not suspicious. Curious. Almost vulnerable. The room felt unusually quiet. Then a small smile appeared. That may be the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me. My heart softened immediately. In that moment, I realized something important. I was no longer choosing Benjamin because I remembered the future. I was choosing him because of the man sitting in front of me now. And somehow, that realization felt even more powerful than the second chance that brought me here. The feeling that lingered after Benjamin's words followed me home. That evening, I sat by my apartment window long after sunset, watching city lights flicker like distant memories. For the first time since returning to the past, my thoughts were no longer focused on what I had lost. They were focused on what I was building. A different life. A different outcome. A different version of myself. Yet change was never invisible to others. The next morning, my phone rang repeatedly. Vanessa. I watched her name appear again, and again, until I finally answered. Her voice came through immediately, sharp and suspicious. Where have you been disappearing to? She asked. I leaned against the kitchen counter, calm. Living my life. A pause followed. That answer was not what she expected. Jason is asking questions, she continued. People noticed you have changed. I almost smiled. Of course they noticed. In my previous life, I had been predictable, easy to read, easy to control. Now I was neither. Tell Jason I am not interested in explanations, I replied. Vanessa went silent for a moment. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted slightly, less confident, more calculating. You are making a mistake, she said. That phrase again. I had heard it before in a different timeline. I had believed it then. I did not believe it now. We will see, I said, and ended the call. That afternoon, I visited Benjamin again. His office felt different this time, not because it had changed, but because I had. He greeted me with the same calm expression as always. You look like you have been thinking a lot, he said. I nodded. I have. We sat together in his office while he reviewed documents, and I worked quietly on my phone responding to emails. It was ordinary, comfortable. Yet underneath the silence, something unspoken continued to grow. At one point, Benjamin looked up from his papers. Do you ever regret things? He asked casually. The question surprised me, not because it was difficult, but because it was too accurate. I thought carefully before answering. I used to think regret was about the past, I said. Now I think it is about not recognizing truth when you see it. He studied me for a moment. And have you recognized it? My heart tightened. Slightly. I did not answer immediately. Instead, I looked out the window. The city was the same as always. But my future inside it was no longer fixed. I am getting closer, I finally said. Benjamin did not press further. That was one of the reasons I trusted him. He never forced clarity. He allowed it to arrive naturally. Days passed again. Jason attempted to reconnect several times. Vanessa tried to influence conversations through mutual acquaintances. My father began asking questions about my decisions. But none of them reached me the way they once did. Their voices felt distant now, like echoes from a life I had already outgrown. One evening, Benjamin invited me to a small charity meeting. Nothing formal, just a gathering of people discussing education programs. I almost declined out of habit. Then I remembered something important. In my previous life, I always waited for permission to live differently. This time I said yes. The meeting was simple, honest. People shared ideas instead of status, problems instead of appearances. Benjamin listened more than he spoke. At one point, I realized something quietly. He never tried to lead the room. He tried to understand it. On the way out, as we stood near the entrance of the building, Benjamin turned slightly toward me. You have been different lately, he said. I met his gaze. Different how? He paused briefly, more certain. A small silence followed. Then he added, It suits you. My breath caught slightly at those words. Not because they were grand, because they were sincere. For the first time, I understood that changing my fate was not about avoiding pain. It was about finally choosing clarity over illusion. And standing there beside Benjamin, I realized I had already begun doing exactly that. 3 years later, I stood on the balcony of a building overlooking a city that no longer felt distant from my dreams. The evening sun painted the skyline in shades of gold and amber. Below, people moved through the streets, carrying on with ordinary lives, unaware of how extraordinary second chances could be. The wind brushed gently against my face as I looked toward the horizon. So much had changed. Yet somehow, the most important changes had happened quietly. Benjamin's company had grown beyond anything most people predicted. New offices opened across the country. Community programs expanded. Educational initiatives reached thousands of students. Success found him exactly as I knew it eventually would. The difference was that now I had witnessed every step of the journey, every sacrifice, every difficult decision, every moment when integrity mattered more than profit. Across town, another future had unfolded as well. Vanessa and Jason remained together, but not in the glamorous way they once imagined. Over time, the same qualities that initially attracted them became the source of constant disappointment. Neither had found the happiness they expected. The strange thing was that I no longer felt satisfaction about it. Years earlier, perhaps I would have. Now I simply felt understanding. Some lessons cannot be taught. They can only be lived. My phone vibrated softly. A message from Benjamin appeared on the screen. Meeting room. 5 minutes. Do not be late. A smile immediately appeared on my face. Some things never changed. I left the balcony and made my way downstairs. The conference room occupied the top floor of the foundation headquarters we had built together. What started as a small community project had grown into something far larger than either of us imagined. When I entered, several team members were already gathered around the table discussing scholarship applications and expansion plans. Benjamin stood near the window reviewing documents. He looked up the moment I entered. The same calm eyes. The same steady presence. Yet now there was something else between us. A history we had built together. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours. Ideas were exchanged. Goals were discussed. Future projects were planned. By the end, everyone slowly departed until only Benjamin and I remained. The room grew quiet. Evening light stretched across the polished table. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then Benjamin walked toward the window and looked out across the city. "Do you ever think about how different everything could have been?" he asked. My heart paused. If only he knew. I joined him near the glass. Sometimes. He nodded slowly. I do too. Silence settled comfortably between us. Not empty silence. Familiar silence. The kind shared by people who no longer need constant words. Finally, Benjamin looked toward me. I am grateful things happened exactly the way they did. Emotion tightened unexpectedly in my chest. Because I understood the truth behind those words better than anyone. Every mistake from my first life. Every regret. Every painful lesson. They all led me here. Not to wealth. Not to success. To clarity. To gratitude. To a life built on truth instead of appearances. I smiled softly. So am I. Outside, the city lights began appearing one by one as daylight faded. The future stretched ahead of us, unwritten and full of possibility. Years earlier, I believed a second chance meant changing fate. Standing beside Benjamin, I finally understood something deeper. Fate was never the enemy. Blindness was. The greatest gift I received was not another life. It was another opportunity to see clearly. And as I looked at the man I once overlooked and now cherished beyond words, one truth echoed quietly through my heart. Sometimes happiness is not about getting a new future. Sometimes it is simply about recognizing the right person before it is too late.